PowerPoint, but I'm not going to read about the Creation Museum because I'm a little bit freaked out. But I'll tell you about it afterwards. So this book, Paradise Lost, is a history of people looking for the Garden of Eden on Earth. Am I hearable? Can you guys hear me okay? It's people who really think that they can use the Bible as a map to find a real place on Earth. And each chapter follows, yes, it's funny already. Each chapter follows a different person at a different time who has a different idea of a place for the Garden of Eden. The piece I contributed to the first issue of The Common was about a priest in 1901 who believed that a large Native American earthwork in the state of Ohio in the shape of a snake was the mark of the Garden of Eden. So he thought it was in Ohio. And this chapter that I'm going to read is one of my favorite characters that I'm going to introduce you to, who has, as you'll hear, a very different idea. In the beginning, when the heavens were like the white of an egg, and the earth was like the yolk, God created Adam, or, as the Chinese call him, Tian Huang. So wrote a 42-year-old businessman, Zhe Xuantai, on Sunday evening, October 25th, 1914. Outside his study on Queens Road East in Hong Kong, thunder pealed and lightning flashed. 2 months before, Germany had declared war against France and Britain, and the European world was falling apart. From his home 6,000 miles away along the South China Sea, Say wondered what he could do to help put it back together. The solution came to him, as he put it, like a flash of light: the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was not in southern Mesopotamia near the head of the Persian Gulf, where the misguided Europeans thought it was. After all, Mesopotamia was bare and ugly. Quote, "Is it likely that Almighty God would create man and place him in such a corner of the world?" So where was Eden then? In order to better focus on finding it, Say skipped dinner and stayed up all night. By 8 the following morning, he had completed a draft of The Creation, the Real Situation of Eden, and the Origin of the Chinese. True story. For 7 days and 7 nights, he rewrote and revised without eating or sleeping. Finally, he rested. The real situation of Eden was in China. Specifically, in a crescent-shaped oasis in the Mongolian desert known as Chinese Turkestan. On this high plateau between two jagged mountain ranges, there were the 4 necessary rivers of paradise, as the Bible says: the Kashgar, the Aksu, the Kolon, and the Yarkand. The 4 rivers flowed into one great river, Tarim, as the Bible said. The Tarim flowed eastward, as the Bible said. The Tarim River Basin was well known for its precious stones, as the Bible said it should be. Though he'd never been to Chinese Turkestan himself, Say had it on good authority that the bed of the Yarkand was covered with multicolored jade pebbles. Mesopotamia, on the other hand, produced no precious stones or minerals, only, quote, an abundant supply of clay and petroleum. Say must be forgiven for not knowing just how valuable the black molasses-like liquid bubbling out of the ground in Mesopotamia would turn out to be. The Creation was published by Hong Kong printers Kelly and Walsh in English several weeks later. Instead of a title page, the slim 35-page book opened with a formal photograph of the author. Say wore a dark suit jacket and striped tie. His short hair was perfectly parted in the English style, and his tough eyes stared confidently out at the camera. There were no angles, no shadows, nothing was hidden, and just the slightest hint of a smile beneath his pencil-thin mustache. Say wanted to be judged on his own merits and treated without prejudice by anyone. By the time of his book's publication, all the English-speaking and Chinese-speaking residents of Hong Kong would have known who Say was, and they would have known his opinion on pretty much everything, because he was always expressing it in public venues. He wrote seething editorials against foot binding, against slavery, against the vandalization of historic relics, against the opium trade that Britain had fought so hard to protect, and against the practice of feng shui, which had been used by Chinese to justify killing Chinese Christians. Instead, he advocated religious toleration and the establishment of an independent Christian church for China, a church that would no longer have to be of England or of the United States or of anywhere else, China for the Chinese. He wanted the Chinese representatives serving in Hong Kong's legislative council to be elected rather than appointed. He wanted to found a Chinese club and free library like the British members-only clubs. Chinese people needed to learn to take the best trappings of Western civilizations for themselves without entirely merging with their colonizers. Say dreamed of a place where all this was possible. There's no telling when exactly his dreams for a future peaceful China took up residence in the distant past, in the far reaches of the Mongolian desert. He wasn't the first to find the future in the past. The Garden of Eden has always been located both in the original past and the idealized future. Even so, the Mongolian desert seemed an extreme choice. Say had never visited the new dominion then known as Chinese Turkestan, indeed few people had. The 500,000 square mile plateau wedged between Mongolia and Tibet had become an official province of China only recently, after years of battling between China and the area's population of Mongol ethnic groups. There was also a Russian threat from the north. The region's frigid temperatures and rocky terrain made it inaccessible to all but its native inhabitants, the nomadic Uyghurs, who spoke a language related to Turkish and traversed the flat desert by camel. Every year, 100 of those camels, along with some horses and 5,000 tons of grain, had to be paid to the central Chinese government. For this, the Uyghurs bought themselves a Chinese military governor who sat behind a fortress wall doing not much. To the rest of China, this vast territory looked like empty space. After all, there are only 2.5 million people in a region that today makes up 1/6 of China's total area. But to say, Chinese Turkestan looked like paradise. If a place's mystery corresponds to its paradise potential, Chinese Turkestan was practically heaven. The American Asiatic Society sponsored a major expedition through Turkestan in 1922, 8 years after Say formulated his theory, and even then, the expedition's chief geologist called the area virtually unknown, scientifically speaking. For Say, the three problems in his book's title all overlapped: the creation, the real location of Eden, and the origin of the Chinese, and by extension, the origin of all humanity. He tackled these enormous questions simultaneously and publicly, weaving in whatever new mysteries science discovered in Central Asia or anywhere else. He formulated his thoughts in letters to newspapers, then republished them one by one in pamphlet form. Here are some titles: The Origin of the Mongolian Desert and Its Prehistoric Fossils, The Real Mountains of Ararat, New Theory of the Universe, and Origin of Typhoons. Solution of Easter Island Mystery, The Solution of Mysterious Blank in Ancient Egyptian History, The Age of the Siberian Mammoth. Wide-ranging. Say didn't bother with careful proofs. Science inspired him to revisit the Bible. His answers came as a series of lightning bolts, like those that flashed outside his window as he put the finishing touches on his book. Say's creation story is an electrical storm of geology, anti-Darwinism, Bible stories, Chinese folklore, and nationalist propaganda. Say was actually appropriating a very old Chinese idea, the image of the Middle Kingdom. Everything came from China: language, religion, architecture, ceramics, horses and carriages, agriculture, mathematics, even, according to Say, the Mesopotamian alphabet. It only made sense to him that human life itself began in China. Still, the Garden of Eden, like salvation through Christ, can't be too close to home, too easy to access. If it were, how much could it be worth? Say favored China taking up as much space as possible. Chinese Turkestan was as far away from Hong Kong as a place could be and still be in China. Say did not spend a lot of time describing the landscape of his Central Asian Eden. The earliest humans lived in peace along the banks of the Tarim River, along with giant species of pre-flood animals, such as the woolly mammoths, whose skeletons were being uncovered in Siberia, as he wrote. These first civilizations existed mostly in order to be wiped out by the Great Flood. His flood was really a tidal wave so vast that it covered all of his proposed 10 continents, in water, convulsing the land masses and splitting them apart into today's 7 continents, pushing Atlantis downward and lifting up Central Asia. The Great Wave also caused the sudden death by freezing or drowning of all of Eden's gigantic mammals. It was important that the flood be sudden. The fossilized mammoths found in Siberia still had grass in their teeth. How could that be true, Say wondered, if the Darwinians were correct, and the mammoths died out slowly over millions of years. Chinese Turkestan turned into a vast inland sea with 600-year-old Noah, or, as Say claimed he is named in the ancient Chinese epics, Nuwa, floating on top. Here, Say paused for a moment to acknowledge that some people would not believe his theory. Scholars of Chinese folklore, for example. They thought that Nuwa was female. In the ancient texts, Nuwa was usually connected to the female god Fuhi, their long snake-like tails intertwining. Sometimes Nuwa was Fuhi's sister, sometimes her husband, sometimes her wife. There are 2,000 years worth of stories and songs to choose from. Say did not have the patience for mythological variation. Chinese folklore was, according to him, simply confused and vague. The female Nuwa was purely a scholarly error. Fuhi he declared, was imaginary. Because of these mistakes, the dates for ancient Chinese history did not match up with Christian history, and the Chinese did not see their similarity of their own folklore and the Bible of Nuwa and Noah. As Nuwa's civilization got up and running, they found time to repopulate the world. The sons of Japhet became the modern European nations, whose ancestors did not become thoroughly civilized until the advent of Jesus Christ. In the meantime, the sons of Japhet became confused. In the many generations since the flood, they had wandered far from China, or, as Say said the Bible called it, Shinar, that they found themselves surrounded by vast oceans, inland seas, the frozen wilds of Siberia, and formidable mountain chains. Because of their isolation, Say wrote, the Proto-Europeans mistook Mesopotamia and the surrounding country to be the whole world. The ancient historians took all the events that had happened in the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis and crowded them into this flat, empty corner of the Middle East. This, Say felt, was a singular shame. Could they have made a greater mistake? Western history even claimed that the Chinese themselves came from the West. But, Say wrote, this theory is contrary to all known facts. The world had originated in China, and the Chinese had originated in Chinese Turkestan, and it was time the truth be known. The idea of Mesopotamia had gone entirely too far. It is this mistake which has confused and confounded the church and the thinking world for close on 4,000 years. And at the moment, the thinking world was engaged in tearing itself apart in its First World War. He hoped that once his news of Chinese Turkestan Eden had reached those in power, quote, the whole human race will soon learn to believe in the Bible, and that henceforth men will love and treat each other as brothers. He urged everyone who agreed with him to work toward four goals: universal disarmament, universal peace, the protection and civilization of all the weak and savage races of the world, and the brotherhood of man. Once these goals had been accomplished, and the nations and governments of the world have reached a state ready to be federated, wrote Say, China should turn the Garden of Eden into an international state and establish the Parliament of Nations there. Then will there be peace on earth.